first time in Delhi. Yeah.
Ready?
I want to.
You were not there for the roundtable?
Welcome.
How many minutes
We will be starting with the roundtable discussion.
So let me.
Have to visit India with you.
We hope you had a lovely break and an opportunity to talk to people. We will now start with the roundtable discussion entitled A Multi-Partner Approach. Professor Cole Durham will be the moderator for this event. Our panelists will include Professor Mohammed Amin Abdullah, member of the Steering Committee for the National Agency for Pancasila Ideology Development, Dr. Vinu Aram, Director Shanti Ajram, Dr. Mustafa Ali, Secretary General, Global Network of Religions for Children, and Director, Arigato International Nairobi, and then Adam Phillips, the Executive Director of Local Faith and Transformative Partnerships Hub at the USAID. Thank you.
Well, it's a pleasure to be moderating this panel and to have really some extremely significant and well-known experts on the various themes of our conference. And what we thought we'd do is, I'll ask people some questions, but they have a right to sort of start out with a 3 to 5 minute note, and then I'll have some additional questions for them, but we'll also try to open this up so that it can be a discussion from the audience. What I don't know, do we have somebody tell me, Blythe or someone in the back, do we have roving mics to pick up people? Yeah, we do have roving mics, so you can get ready to participate with this panel as we have time. So first of all, we have Professor Mohammed Amin Abdullah, as indicated. He's the, in addition to being on the steering committee member of the National Agency for Pancasila Ideology Development, he's a professor of philosophy at Islamic State University. And maybe I'd let you start. I know you've done a lot of work on cross-cultural literacy and religious literacy, but go ahead and address this or in general. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Cole Durham, Professor Catherine Marshall, and Baha'i community, all the speaker panelists, and ladies and gentlemen. Today we want to talk about the multi-partner approaches. So I will give some introductory, then I will talk about our initiative about cross-cultural religious literacy in Indonesia. Indonesia is like India, the United States of America, and many other countries in the world, has a very diverse society culturally and religiously. Collaboration between people of different religions and beliefs should become a norm. Unfortunately, polarizations and divisions are becoming more widespread in many parts of the world today. Our important theme of one earth, one family, and one future is under serious threat. So, I propose that one of our priorities in 2023 and 2024 should be on how to counter the growing polarizations and divisions, especially in the area of religions and belief. The transformative role of education, especially religious education, is essential. How can religions become an important asset to the life of a nation instead of a tool to cause divisions in the society? I am here as part of Indonesian delegations who comes from different organizations and religious background, but are connected through the partnership initiated by Lemena Institute in the program called Cross-Cultural Religious Literacy. This is one of the best practices and contribution of faith-based organization that I can share to address this growing problem. It is a breakthrough initiative that has brought Muslim and Christian teachers together in religious literacy training. It will be gradually expanded to include teachers of other religions too. It builds the competency that's skilled to strengthen multi-faith coexistence and collaboration. In less than 2 years, more than 4,000 madrasah schools teachers from all provinces in Indonesia have taken the program. For most of them, it is completely new experience. They never had a training or even interfaith experience like that before. For example, the Muslim teachers learn about 3 competencies. In personal competencies, they study Islam in more comprehensive way. In comparative competency, they get a new experience of interacting directly with the Christian pastors and Jewish rabbis. In collaborations competency, they learn about building multi-faith collaboration. Rabbi David Saperstein, who gave the forum a greeting earlier today, is also a teaching in this program. The response is strongly positive from both Muslim and Christian teachers. They are able to move toward a more inclusive understanding of religions, which is critical for the unity and the stability of the diverse nation for the future of humanity in general. The teachers in this program have now begun to teach their students with this religious literacy principle. At the moment, Lemena Institute and the Saneh Institute in Accra are exploring ways to use this experience to the benefits the teachers in Ghana. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And let me turn now to Avinu Aram, who is a pediatrician and has focused her work on children in many ways, but she's also a bridge figure, being a leader both in Religions for Peace, CAICID, and the Interfaith Alliance for Safer Communities. So we feel very fortunate to have her with us. And so, Vino, how can religious actors from different countries and ethnic backgrounds join efforts more proactively in addressing the crises, the kind of polycrises that Catherine Marshall was talking about earlier?
Thanks so much, Dr. Durham. It's a joy to be here, but also for all of you who've traveled to our home country, welcome to India. It's a special moment because in India, we are celebrating 75 years of our independence. We're also celebrating a milestone. We've become the most populous country in the world. We're not thinking of the demographic dividend 20 years ago, 3 or 4 decades ago. We looked at it as a problem. But during the G20 process, of which I have been an integral part in this country, in various events, we were reminded something. I was speaking at the G20 Young Ambassadors meeting, and we were reminded by the Sherpa, the G20 Sherpa, Mr. Amitabh Kant, that the average age of India will be 29 years when India turns 100.
Wow.
We will be providing 1/3 of the global workforce. And while I need no data or evidence to convince me even more that investment in children is the right investment, these new statistics and the moment in history that we are part of has made me even more aware of the work we do today and the work we shape tomorrow. So allow me, Dr. Durham, to elaborate my thoughts in the next 5 minutes over 3 things. One is the word partnerships. Mm-hmm. You are in the city where Mahatma Gandhi took his last breath. If you have time in these next days, please do visit the memorial of Mahatma Gandhi. It is a place where you will find quiet, but you will also find inspiration to keep doing what you're doing. As you enter the memorial of Mahatma Gandhi, Rajghat as we say, that was the last venue where we held a joint program with Arigato International and the Interfaith Alliance. On the right are the words of Mahatma Gandhi. Recall, whenever you're in doubt, recall the face of the most vulnerable. And if what you are doing makes a difference to them, your doubt should melt away. And so, Dr. Durham, this meeting here, in the backdrop of a polycrisis, as Catherine called it, or a confluence of crisis, which has significant consequence, whether it's poverty, whether it is the quality of life for our children, whether it is joblessness, or whether it is just lack of peace, is something that we have to address. And partnership here, I will speak from the Indian context and the global context for a minute. I think it's important. When India won independence 75 years ago, poverty was our majority experience. And while the government took upon itself the responsibility of creating an environment and interventions for poverty reduction, religious communities, Archbishop Machado is here, my friends from all different traditions are here, took upon their moral call to collaborate. And you will see in the Indian development experience that the most vulnerable, the unreached, have often been serviced together by the government and the religious communities. No wonder 15% of healthcare in this country still comes from religious communities. Those are concrete numbers, 15% of healthcare. In the underserved areas, education for children were brought by religious communities. People who took upon their moral calling to do something concrete and start. So partnership became part of the cause that we stood together. And the cause was brilliantly articulated by Mahatma Gandhi as not political freedom, but sarvodaya. He coined this word. Sarvam in Sanskrit means everyone, and udayam is the rising or the progress. So partnership, I think, friends, is something that allows us to rise above our individual capacities and take forward a cause. 75 years later, if not poverty, but enough is the majority experience. Officially, only 24% of India is below poverty line. It is because of this partnership and the moral calling. The second thing is partnership requires bridge builders. We don't come together automatically. Here, the Interfaith, the G20 Interfaith Forum, our friends in India, the Interfaith, it requires effort where you rise above your own little identity. Ego has to be transcended. And there too, I think, religious communities have played a major role. I will take one example and 1 more minute and conclude. I speak of these 2 things, concrete work on the field, because as Dana said, faith cannot be just a moral compass. It has to be a call for concrete action. But the other thing that faith requires us is to work together, bring people together. And when from the United States, Martin Luther King was invited to India, and the government, for various reasons, could not welcome him to the diplomatic source. You know what happened? It was the Gandhian movement and the religious community of India that welcomed Reverend Martin Luther King. The exhibition is on. And the president of this country and the prime minister of this country participated in an event where he could give the call for justice as a shared call in this country. So I think when G20 meets here, let us not forget these two concrete ways in which partnerships can be advanced. The cause, and the polycrisis is a cause. I will argue the most important cause here is to focus on the needs of children. And the second, to look at the interconnectedness with the others. But the other is the role of religious communities to convene, and convene in a way where we meet not only to talk to one another, but we meet to hear one another, build partnerships for future action, but review what we have done together. So in conclusion, may I say that this forum for me is one of the pit stops in between our work. It's a pit stop where we remind India of its own track record of partnerships, but we can remind our governments and our nations that in an economy that is interconnected, a crisis that has multiple stressors around the world, working together has no alternative. Thank you very much.
So, well, thank you as well. We'll turn now to Dr. Mustafa Ali. You are heavily involved with work with children, both as director of the Arigato International in Nairobi and also as the Secretary General of the Global Network of Religions for Children. So maybe you could speak to partnerships, building partnerships, focusing on children and focusing on your work, or focusing on the vulnerable in general.
Thank you, Cole, and thank you, Catherine and Ms. Dana Humaid, President of the Interfaith Alliance for Safer Communities, Cole, Catherine, G20 Interfaith Forum, for organizing this meeting, where, as Vinu said, is a place we stop and reflect as we re-energized to do the work that we are doing. The one earth, one family, one future, that is what we are coming to discuss here today. I want to focus on children and young people as we think about multi-partner approaches to the work that we are doing. India today, and I'm happy to be here in now the world's most populous country in the world, almost 1.5 billion people. And of these 1.5 billion people, 65% are below 35 years. 65%. This is 990 million. Close to 1 billion are below 35. And of course, majority of that 1 billion are children. So when we are talking about the partnerships that we want to be talking about, we looking at into the future, and not so distant future. We are looking at the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years, 40 years. And how do we want this future to look like? And that is us. But then we need to ask the children and young people, how do they see, or what future do they want to have? And if this future is not going to be hopeful, if this future is not going to be inspiring, then we are on the wrong path. We have to speak hope, inspiration to the young people and children. Unfortunately, when we are talking about hope and inspiration, and that's what we do very well and we are good at, there are, as one of the speakers spoke about this morning, very deplorable, appalling diversion of faith and religion to certain ends that do not bring that future, or rather hopeful future, and to inspire the world. And this arises out of the instrumentalization of religion for ends and objectives that are inimical to that future, to that hope and inspiration that we would like to all of us bring forth so that the children and the young people can see and can be hopeful and inspired by what we are saying. Extremism, radicalism, and more importantly, politicization of religion kills that hope. It makes that future look very grim. And this is what we as faith communities leaders should work towards in helping our children and working with our children, and in some cases putting them at the forefront to lead us. We should not fear that, to lead us in crafting this hopeful, inspiring future. And to do so, there are principles that perhaps we ourselves need to follow and be governed by, and that is the global-local nexus. We think global, discuss global, but we need to be local. Secondly, we have to be effective in our delivery, and it's by ourselves being effective that we are going to give the children and the younger generation a sense that the future is hopeful. We have to be inclusive, all of us, all faiths, gender, various spiritual traditions, various age groups, intergenerational dialogue. This is what we mean at Arigato International when you're talking about inclusivity. And we have to be principled in everything that we do. Honesty and sincerity is something that should be guiding the work that we are doing. In conclusion, as we speak about one earth, one family, and one future, we have to, and again I go back to what our children, the young people, the younger generation, the 1 billion that are here in India, in one country, and of course, globally the population is young. That future has to be hopeful, inspiring, safe, flourishing, and above all, sustainable. Thank you.
So finally, we turn to Adam Phillips. Adam his background is he served as a pastor, so he brings the religion side into the picture, but he's currently the director of the Center for Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnerships with USAID, and so he also thinks aggressively about how to build partnerships in this domain. So tell us about your work and how that contributes to these ideas.
Thank you so much, Cole. It's good to be here. I want to thank Cole and Catherine Marshall for their work every year, tirelessly, year in and year out, organizing faith communities with the Interfaith Alliance, and so many of you. Good to see so many good friends over the last few years at these G20 interfaith forums. I think it's critical at this moment in time, as we face so many intersecting crises, to hear from the faith community. I've been on both sides of this equation. Yes, I was a pastor. I am a pastor. I now serve in the Biden administration, leading faith-based partnerships, local partnerships at USAID. And so these are issues that we welcome the feedback. We welcome the kind of leaning in of the faith community in our own policy development, our own conversations around programming and partnership, and we value that as a principle of what it means to live in free and fair and inclusive democratic societies. So I couldn't be more pleased to be here. And especially here in this Lotus Temple. When I was in seminary in Chicago, trained by mentors in the tradition of Martin Luther King, who was able to do so much faithful work in our country because of the solidarity and partnership of rabbis and others, and learning from Mahatma Gandhi. We would go up to the Baha'i Temple in Wilmette, and that was such an inspired place for me to begin to understand that there was a world bigger than my own in the United States, and the own issues and how they're all intersected in their needs. So I lead the Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships at USAID. It's part of a larger framework across U.S. government, working on both international and domestic policy matters in the United States, led by Melissa Rogers at the White House, who sends her greetings. We know that we know that this work is important, but it's also not just the right thing to do, it's the priority of the Biden administration. We have a mandate to serve our neighbors in need, both near and far. And I'm struck by the importance of living this mandate every day as we face these compounding crises and humanitarian disasters around the world, including the aftershocks of COVID-19, the climate change concerns, the global food security crisis, resurgence of authoritarianism and conflict around the world, the increasing pressure of debt, as Rabbi Saperstein elevated in his remarks this morning. And I'm especially this morning thinking of all those who are suffering as a result also of Russia's unprovoked and brutal invasion of Ukraine and the unfolding crisis this day in Sudan. These challenges threaten to not only limit our progress toward achieving sustainable development, but potentially to unwind the progress that so many of us in this room and the countries in the G20 and elsewhere have already made. So I think this convening, this Interfaith 20, presents an opportunity to gather as a broader development community, reflect on these complex challenges, and discuss the many opportunities for partnerships, as we've been saying this morning, to address them together, to make that inclusive, integrative determination for impact that can truly transform our neighborhoods near and far. At USAID, we have a long history of partnering with and alongside faith-based organizations to achieve shared development and humanitarian goals. I look forward to maybe sharing a little bit more later about these partnerships and how we are equipping even our workforce to engage religious communities and faith-based organizations, including through our new strategic religious engagement policy, very much aware and concerned around how faith communities have been instrumentalized, but this is about inclusive partnership. This is about inclusive development and work together. So I really look forward to this conversation. Thank you.
Well, let me just ask each of the panelists to maybe reflect briefly on how they think religious organizations, in the context of national and multilateral institutions, how can faith organizations be most relevant and effective? I know one of the challenges we face thinking about issues in the G20 interfaith is, number one, where do you find the sort of the overlap, the intersection between general policy issues and where religion can really play a meaningful role? And then subordinate to that, or maybe even more important, how do you fill that role most effectively? So maybe, I don't know if anyone wants to take that in any particular order, but okay.
I'll go first. Yeah, I mean, as many of you here today are keenly aware, religious communities and faith-based organizations serve most of the most vulnerable populations in the world. We often, in the development conversations we heard this morning, these conversations can sometimes not be as glamorous as some of the other conversations could be. But we often talk about last mile delivery, and I think faith-based actors, faith leaders, faith communities they must think, last mile, well, there is no last mile. We're already there. That's our community, that's our neighborhood. And so without these frontline responders, these faith actors, faith leaders, communities of faith and goodwill, responding to these great global crises, they need to be seen and centered in these conversations on policy, is my belief. They don't have a seat at the table, though. And so how do we find room at the table? How do we make the table bigger? Or maybe ask the question, who's not here at the table? And I think this work that Cole and you've labored on is begging that question. USAID, the U.S. Agency for International Development, we are committed to partnering with and alongside faith-based and community organizations to build bridges with these groups. We're also working to strengthen the capacity and knowledge of our workforce. I've got 2 colleagues here from the embassy and the USAID mission here in Delhi. Really delighted they could join me. And we had a meeting on Friday, and we were talking about the capacity and knowledge of our colleagues in countries around the world, and how we collaborate with local groups in what we call strategic religious engagement. And by strengthening our workforce's knowledge base and capacity, they will in turn empower faith-based and community partners to advocate for their own development priorities and drive the decision-making process. Not us telling what faith-based actors what we think they should hear, but in dialogue, in conversation, to co-create these efforts. So I just want to say one thing about this. This is a long effort of work. This is decades-long work, but particularly for our context in the United States, this has been a 10-year engagement. Building on the 2013 U.S. National Strategy on Religious Leader and Faith Community Engagement. It spans administrations, it spans the kind of whims of the moment, and it's about centering local actors and international actors in the faith-based space to work together in partnership. This year, I'm very proud to announce that in implementing that strategy that's 10 years old, we are finally getting to developing and set to announce a new faith-based policy. It's called Building Bridges in Development, USAID's Strategic Religious Engagement Policy. It demonstrates the agency's commitment to faith-based and community engagement as a coordinated approach that advances locally led action for sustainable solutions with our broader development agenda. And as we commemorate this 10th anniversary of that strategy within USAID, I look forward to sharing this policy with this group and others, and maybe in Brazil next year we can have reflections on the progress we've made with that policy.
So any other comments? Did you want to say something, Vino?
Very quickly, 2 things. I already made a point about convening and how religious community, I already made a point about the rationale behind collaborative action, going side by side the moral call. 2 things that I wanted to do is, I think, mutual literacy. Oftentimes within religious communities, because we are so compelled to be the voice of the most marginalized and the ones who are excluded, we fail to see that there is another voice that we can add to the conversation, which is an equally powerful voice, and that is one of shared competency. And this is something in India that we have experimented and we have benefited. The HIV/AIDS pandemic was a wonderful opportunity. I served on Government of India's committee, and I'll just sort of take one sentence from there. I remember when in the list of organizations that the government could fund, we put in religious communities, there was an immediate no, they will bring in stigma, we're talking about sexual relations and this. Then when the data was brought in about their presence in the healthcare sector, so I think mutual literacy and competency that allows for religious communities to be in this. So expanded table, yes, but competency to do that as well. The second thing that I find in the C's, convening, collaboration, is I think the call for community cohesion. We have to keep doing it. We are unequal countries, unequal societies, unequal families. And this call for community cohesion, I was struck by this, how many times in the 75-year history of India, where India wanted to take a call, where religious communities and civil society provided India and her people to live this spirit. So I think community cohesion coming out of the pandemic, the confluence of crisis, how do we do that together? Instead of it being a confrontational or a sort of a partial thing. And close to community cohesion is to dare to ask for peace. Catherine said that this was seen as an instrument, the G20 meeting was seen as an instrument of crisis management. And we all know crisis can be anticipated. And so the call for cohesion at a time where people are not thinking about, I think, is something that we have to do. So shared competency to be able to sit on the table and to make collective calls for community cohesion and peace would be my other two thoughts.
So I'm conscious that we started a little bit late, and my understanding is that we were originally scheduled to end at noon, but I think we should go till about 10 after. Let me just open things if there are particular questions from the audience. I have some additional questions I'd love to ask. So, yes. Yeah. Oh, okay. So we've got more time. So we've got time until 12:30. So when do you get more time? I mean, this is.
We might need all 30 minutes.
Okay. Let's see. Down on the front row, and then Eugene. Let's see. I don't know where the traveling mics are. Right here. Yep.
Yeah. Thank you all for your presentation. My name is Fred Nyabera, Arigato International. When I think about the multi-partners approach, what comes to my mind is power imbalance within the partnerships. How do we break this gap? Because as long as there is a power imbalance, whether it's because of finances, whether it's because of minority-majority equation, north-south, there'll be no mutual and reciprocal partnerships that is equal. And that's a reality that will not move this forward. And then secondly is just the competing and different values and priorities. Again, how do you bring that bridge together? Thank you.
Well, let's see. We'll see if someone wants to take that one on. Go ahead, Professor Abdullah.
Okay, thank you. As we talked this morning about the partnership, it is not only to be united, but unity in diversity is very, very important. So each of the community has its own understanding, but how to collaborate between those diverse opinions is very, very important. So no minority, majority, it cannot be taken as granted. We don't talk about minority and majority in partnership because collaboration between both is very, very important. Here in Indonesia, for example, the collaboration between minority and majority is so very, very clear. We as a delegate here also from Christian, from Muslim, from many other organizations, and they are equal. Partnership means equality. Thank you.
Can I add to that? You know, when we speak of partnerships and this need to work together, I know there's an accompanying experience that must go, Fred, with partnerships, which is reflection, introspection within the partner's own experience. And this is an equally valuable gift. When you listen, when you dialogue, when you take something, a question or a thought, you come back. You're not the same person or the same community. You know, again, I'm going back a little bit in India when India won freedom. The call from our national leaders to say political freedom is not the only goal of the freedom movement. Gender equality, the presence of the most marginalized as equal members in New India. So this dimension of partnership, which makes the partner better equipped or enriched, whatever you want to say going forward, is important. And especially when we're dealing with the polycrisis now or the multiple crisis now, lot of introspection will be required. Otherwise, you have the other danger. This morning I was in the first panel, they said unity doesn't mean conformity, it doesn't mean plateauing. Unity means to be able to struggle a little bit. The constitution of this country took 16 to 18 months. Who could vote? So many different ways. The one who could read, the one who was educated, the one who could represent. And then finally, India decided with her deep wisdom, every Indian is equal. But it came through a process of introspection and open dialoguing. Cole, that open dialoguing in partnership today for multiple reasons is less. You don't want to be politically incorrect. You can't keep your conversations and your comments out of the public domain, but you need that freedom to struggle, evolve, contradict, but then build an active harmony. That is something I hope in the political process. It's shrinking in the political process, it is shrinking in our public spaces as well. So partnership for me will also be a different temperament and a different mindset in which you evolve and you expand the space for contrary opinions, but eventually leading to what is better. How can we do it best? How can we safeguard the interests?
Yeah, I appreciate the question, Fred, because I think what's paramount for us as we face these intersecting crises, this poly crisis, is the need to reimagine what partnerships look like. We not just sort of the usual suspects, but how do we work with and learn from deeply locally rooted partners? That's something that's a huge priority for Administrator Samantha Power at USAID. She's tasked us with moving mountains on localization, is what we call it. Which is a set of internal reforms, actions, and behavior changes to ensure our work puts local actors in the lead. It strengthens local systems and builds capacity. Not just moving more program dollars to local partners, which is a really critical goal for us and something we're striving to achieve. We're about to release new data on the progress we've made, which is the highest in the last 10 years. So we're proud of that work. But also, how do we work with, and I mentioned this earlier, but how do we center local voices to co-design, co-create, give us hard feedback, right? And in the spirit of locally led development, or as many may describe it as decolonizing aid. And it's really this spirit of shifting power, hearing the voices of so many, especially that mantra from the disability rights community, nothing about us without us. We are striving to do more and better on that.
Yeah, I just want to underscore, I think, the importance of what can be learned in partnerships. And this has a couple of dimensions. One of the things that's actually important is the partners have to be able to sometimes pull back and look at themselves and see what they've learned. They may have distinctive viewpoints, and others need to have some patience to allow those processes to work. But there's no doubt that it can be an enriching process because none of us have a monopoly on wisdom, and so that's very helpful. Let's see, Eugene, I think you were next with the mic.
Yeah, thank you very much, the panelists. My question is directed to Dr. Mustafa Ali. Good to hear you again, but it's good to perhaps also hear from the other panel. The question pertains to youth or young adults' participation in multi-partnership approaches. Perhaps Dr. Mustafa can highlight what practical ways it means whereby we can bring the young adults or the younger generation in this multi-partner approach for global issues that we are facing. Given that many of the young adults have many different priorities. Some, wants to go to marketplace, some wants to establish better careers, some are establishing family life and so on. So these are different priorities. So the question here is, how do we overcome this challenge to bring them together in a multi-partnership kind of collaboration for the kind of work that we are doing in different contexts? Share some practical aspects and experience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. The question of, how do we involve young people in the work that we do in building this one earth, one family, one future. A lot of time we actually normally as adults assume that children especially may not be able or do not have the capacity to provide solutions or contribute to the discussions and solutions. But in our experience and in the work that we do, we've actually found out that they do have and they give very good contributions that are good solutions to the challenges that we are facing. And it's not just about the end goal, it's about the process itself, that they feel, the young people feel that they are part of the solution and that they are, according to their evolving capacities, building a world that they believe is going to be peaceful, is sustainable for themselves. And in doing so, when we give them that opportunity, they actually relish that. You said that they are busy, in schools and doing other things, developing early stages of developing their career. Well, if we actually allow them in that development of their career, right from the early stage, that this is the world, hopeful, prosperous, flourishing world that everybody is talking about and thinking about, how about to them, and posing this question, how can you contribute to that? Because they're going to live in that world more than we are. We have less years in this world than them. And I think we have to be intentional, very deliberate in the inclusion and bringing children and young people onto this kind of discussions to learn from them. And obviously they are always learning from us. And when they learn from us and they see that they are being consulted, they are going to not only just provide solutions together with the adults in the room or wherever space that is there, but that solution that they feel that they are part of contributing, they're going to stick to that and they're going to implement that as they grow and grow into their careers. Thank you.
May I underline what Dr. Mustafa Ali said about evolving capacities? I think if the principle is that we want to have young people and children as our partners, we also acknowledge that there are evolving capacities. And may I just take two examples? During COVID, I don't know it's not a uniform experience, but in India we had 556 days of school closures. Neither the government, nor the educational fraternity, nor the children, we just kind of moved them from one to the other. But we found in the middle of the pandemic, instead of wasting time online, in a country where digital penetration has been tremendous, but access is an hour, we found out all this nuancing. That if you said, do you have a phone? Yes. If you have access to internet? Yes. How long? 45 minutes. Schools were designing curriculums for 3 hours and 4 hours. So I think that word evolving capacity, if that is linked to what Dr. Mustafa said of the principle, then we will be open. And here, let me underline the second thing that Mr. Adam Phillip reminded us of, is co-creation and co-designing. Not just for children, but in the way we work, because the success metrics will look different. The success metrics will look different. It will not be declarations, it will not be fund allocation alone. It will be different. So one of the challenges in partnerships, and not just bringing the moral voice, is reimagining the success metrics. And for me, during the COVID pandemic, going back to Fred's original comment about it's not equal, the presence of frontline workers in this most populous country of the world, the last mile, whose education might be high school, but who is vital in taking the service to the end, bringing them up. So I think we're in the middle of a struggle as well, Cole, and this confluence of crisis gives us evidence to see that the normal way of working, top-down, centralized, using very limited ways of measuring our success, has to give way. We have to give way, otherwise we will have 1 in 7 children in a mental health crisis. We will have money, but we won't have healthy people. We will have structures, but it won't be populated in a representative way. So I think the only way to prepare is to find a design that matches both. Adults have to unlearn so much. They can't be at the head table. They will have to be uncomfortable. They will have to be questioned. But we have a moment now in history where we can use the evidence of COVID and the confluence of crisis to see how that is. And the G20 event here, called the whole forum, we have gone to 50 Indian cities. It's not only in Delhi. 50 cities are hosting it across. And this is one step in reimagining what it means for a country of hosting a forum. It becomes participatory. So let those success metrics, but also our experience from the COVID pandemic, allow us to reimagine the way we implement partnerships. Thank you.
I want to sort of jump in, and I'll watch for additional questions, but as I was listening to just the staggering numbers of young people that we're going to see in India, but across Africa, in a lot of parts of the world, I'm conscious of sort of two things. One, we're conscious within religious communities of the rise of the nones, the people who indicate that they don't have particular religious affiliation. Now, it's hard to know exactly what that means. Does it mean they really are non-believers? Does it mean that they just don't like organized religion, etc.? But if you think about things on the other side, one of the things that religions with staying power have been able to do is to communicate their religious beliefs across traditions. And I guess my question is, how do these things fit together? The rise of the nuns and and dealing with, on the one hand, you look at the problems that children are facing, child abuse, the kinds of things that are on one side of things, but how does that side of the child protection picture fit in with the larger picture of what's happening to religion generally? In 20 years, what's it going to look like? And what does that mean for religious leaders? What does that mean for youth participants? I don't know if this panel has anything direct to say about these issues.
I feel like I'm speaking all the time. But I thanked Bhai Mohinder Saab and our friend here who has come here for starting the word forgiveness many decades ago. And today we are in the position that this word can be spoken within the UN circles, but beyond the UN circles as well. And I say this because I think that unlearning that I was mentioning in our question, that unlearning must accompany a very deep soul searching. What is it that is absolutely essential in working together? Is it identity alone? Is it the challenges of today alone? Or is it the deep human yearning to be in peaceful coexistence? And this is why, Kola, I mentioned the call for community cohesion. Sometimes it seems fluffy, and we can give it more depth by not just speaking, but maybe being together, eating together, praying together, by confronting crises together. And we will understand the truth. COVID gave us that opportunity. When we have to use that. We shouldn't lose a recent sort of pan-continental experience to do that. Stories keep reminding us of our shared experience. So I think the numbers are going to rise, and there is, therefore, the repository for religious community to draw from. What do children feel when they identify as someone who's not, aligning with the faith, why do they feel they need to do that? Are they missing something in religious communities? Are they not hearing welcome or do not have a space? On the other hand, we should also ask these deep questions. Is that the only way we can work together?
Yeah.
And I think both will give us space to be more open and to find forums in which we can come together. I think young people respond. Professor Anant Ram Bachchan, one of our colleagues, often tells in his university survey, they found that while the number of students who marked religion positively had come down, the number of children involved and students involved in community service activities had quadrupled in the same period.
Yeah.
So the principles and the values are there, but there is something that they don't want to be associated with. So there is food for thought, I think, that allows us to think within governments as well. I mean, what I spoke 20 years ago is still there. And so...
Yeah, thanks, Cole. And I think your question calls particularly religious leaders and their faith communities to ponder why is it that religion is represented or misrepresented so negatively. And it's across all the media platforms. And it is not true that religion is that bad, commensurate to, for example, what states do when it comes to wars. It is states that go to war, but religion sometimes gets actually, shunted aside or blamed for part of that when religion is instrumentalized. And religious leaders oftentimes are called in as ambulance to come and dampen conflicts and so there is need for faith actors to work harder and remove that disinformation and that is deliberate misinformation around religion. And it's not just, it's about when you're talking about ideologies, but religious actors around the world are doing, faith communities are doing a lot of good work. In development, health, education, care, and all that, but we are not good at promoting this good side of religion. And many people that are leaving religious traditions are actually citing, religion is not a force for good, it is actually a force for very bad, dark, and they can see that because of really what is anecdotal evidence. But if we are to present properly, with evidence what faith, religions are actually doing, organization, religious-based or inspired, there is a lot of good that actually faith communities and religions are doing around the world, and we need to get better at presenting that with evidence.
Adam.
I mean, it's a very provocative question. I have a lot of thoughts in my previous life and maybe have some thoughts to share another time. But from my experience in serving in U.S. government and the policy side, I mean, COVID-19, I mean, I can't imagine as a father of a 5.5-year-old, my son being out of school for 500 plus days. It's just, it boggles the mind. And despite that, we did see in COVID, especially with vaccine delivery and a lot of concerns, as was said earlier too, in our own country in the United States around faith leaders either rallied to get shots in arms and dispel some of the myths around that was creating some vaccine hesitancy, or they were perhaps instrumentalized. But I in India here, USAID is partnering with faith-based leaders, including youth, to work on healthcare and dropping stigma around HIV/AIDS, TB. I saw firsthand in Kenya, ahead of the elections, how youth were working with faith leaders to elevate the role of the need of a peaceful election. That was incredibly inspiring. When I was in Iraq last year, up in Kurdish Iraq, working with Yazidi survivors, women and girls that we're not just victims of these atrocities, but we're leading voices for change, especially on reparations. It's just so inspiring. So there are many stories of how youth are out there working on democracy, health, human rights with faith actors. And I think the more and more groups like IF20 can center youth in this space, the better.
Great. Let's see, I see a hand back there. It's sort of in the middle. Yeah.
Hi everyone, thank you so much for the opportunity. So I'm Anojita from Sri Lanka. And also thank you for discussing about young people, because we always been underrepresented, and here like people are talking about us, and that makes me so happy. Because we don't fit to these categories of like number of experience, number of qualifications, so that's why we don't get much opportunities. I think that is one of the experience that these kind of forums should break these age-based qualifications or educational-based qualifications to come and sit in the forums and talk about what we really want. So that is what we will be expecting in the G20 forum as well, because I really wanted to see my colleagues, my fellow young people who are refugees, who are internally displaced people, who are also affected by sexual violences or domestic violences, are sitting in the panel and talking more than the directors and more than the founders of so-called organizations. I think that makes more changes in the future as well. So my question is quite different. So I see G20 as a mechanism, a partnership mechanism, a powerful mechanism which brought more than around 20 countries to come together and talk about economic, political, religious, and so other many other areas. So how this partnership mechanism going to address the problems that are happening in other countries, especially in Sri Lanka, the politicization of religion, power imbalances, and post-war problems that are happening in the communities. So how this mechanism is going to address these ongoing conflicts or problems in countries which are not part of G20, but need more support from G20. Thank you so much.
Adam Phillips is probably most equipped about the governmental response, but I think in a moment of deep humility, some of these forums cannot address everything. I've learned this from the time I was your age to where I have arrived. And I always keep two things in mind. The openness that I had at your age should never leave me. So my areas of concern as a human being has always accompanied me. But my areas of influence become smaller and smaller as I grow in expertise and leadership. I know I have limited time, limited resources. And so this is the way I approach it. And I share this with you sincerely. The human being in me is always alive. And I try to support people who do that work to do it. Should you be on the panel? Absolutely. But I also think that young people should be on the panel, not just because they are part of the problem, but they are, more importantly, they should be part of the solution. And so I am very much part of this global family, and many of us who are trying to break the monoculture of just speaking from the podium. And you must keep us accountable and keep the audit. But during the pandemic, many people, Archbishop Machado is here, he's the secretary of the Catholic Bishops' Conference. We turned up to every meeting that we heard young people. And in my own organization, we had a consultation every quarter. with 100 young people as to what would you like us to do. It dictated the terms in our organization, and we brought it to the big platforms. So 2 answers: as a human being, over time, what we have done. And the second is, that's why I reiterated what Mr. Adam Phillips said about co-creation and co-designing. We have never had this global consensus on youth participation. We have to build on that in finding new designs of communicating more equally. Please help us. Thank you.
So Adam, was she right that you have additional expertise? That was a pretty good statement.
Well put, very well put. I know we're very limited for time. I think I saw one more.
Okay, let's see, we have another hand. Yes, go ahead, Sadvi.
I was struck by the question that Cole put just before this one, regarding the relationship between an increase in none on religion and the intersection between that and rates of child abuse, for example. And we've spoken to the youth continuing, even though they are not identifying as much as religious, continuing to serve, to engage. And yet, what you spoke to was not what they are doing, but that which is being done to them. And as I was listening, it made me realize that there is, as we lose our connection to the sacred, we lose our connection to an entire way of being. And every time I hear people say, which you hear a lot these days, people saying, well, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. And you even mentioned it, maybe they just don't want to belong to an organized religion. And I get that. And as a religious person and a religious leader, and I share this in a room full of people who are religious leaders, it feels like a colossal failure on the part of us as religious leaders. Because what they're saying is, I want to connect to the divine, I want to connect to spirit, I want to connect to all, and yet I don't want to be in a box. And this is what people say when you ask them, well, why? And it's, well, I don't want the box, I don't want the dogma. And my question, in response to your question, for us as leaders and actors of religion is, are we prepared to lessen our death grip on a box and on dogma in order to help those in our congregations stay connected to what we in India would call the Dharma, the way, the core essence? We're not talking about losing that, because it feels to me like that's what we're going to need to do with these emerging populations who say, yeah, I'm spiritual, I'm going to get out there and serve, but I'm not religious, because we lose that sacred. And when we lose the sacred, we end up losing a lot that ends up, I think, leading to this child abuse and so much else that we're seeing in the world.
So that may be a very good statement in itself. I don't know if any of the panelists want to respond or have final statements. We are at the end of time. Okay, well, please join me in thanking our panel and thanking those of you who have... Yeah.